Well, thank you for attending, everyone. Thank you for logging on. And you are here virtually at COVID-19 and college university staff. We are still here. What's next? So this webinar is part of the Rise and Thrive Campus Community Partnerships webinar series. And Rise and Thrive was developed out of funding from the Ohio Governor's Emergency Education Relief Funds offered through the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. It is a collaborative partnership that includes the Ohio College Initiative through Prevention Action Alliance. That's my piece. And it also includes Prevention First, Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse at Ohio State University, and the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health at NeoMed. This Rise and Thrive initiative was developed to support students and promote mental health and wellness across Ohio campuses. This is the second webinar in a series of 4 under the umbrella, topic umbrella of addressing some college best practices for college communities in the time of COVID-19. Now, even though these are, the first 4 will be COVID related, this is our second one out of the first 4. The next one is going to involve vaccine education. That will be coming in May. And then in June, we will be addressing managing high risk drinking events. But after that, there will still be more webinars, educational webinars that will continue through September of 2022. I also want to mention that the Rise and Thrive will be offering a competitive funding opportunity. And I believe that announcement will be coming in June. I don't know exactly when, but definitely keep your eyes out for that because it's going to be offered to, I think, 11 to 12 campuses up to $50,000 each. So again, it's for that Rise and Thrive Building Community Partnerships initiative. So thank you, Dr. Camp, for joining us. I first encountered Dr. Camp at a webinar that I attended. It was more of a national webinar. So the audience was related to college campuses and universities across the United States. And she really presented very well, similar topic, kind of looking at where we've been, how do we evaluate this, how do we move through it, what needs to change, what worked really well, kind of thing. And I just really appreciated Dr. Camp's, I don't know, I think you were very spot on with your ideas and thoughts, which I'm not going to give anything away because you're going to present on this. But so anyway, I thought it was very valuable information that I wanted to bring to our audience in Ohio. And just a little background info for Dr. Camp, and I won't go into deep. She's joined Goucher College at Maryland as the Vice President of Student Affairs and Dean of Students in August. Previously, I believe she came from Florida because she was just lamenting about the weather. So welcome, Dr. Camp, take it away.
Thank you so much. And then please, for everybody logged in, and for Juliana and Lauren, it's Aarika. Sometimes it's just Aarika. And so thank you for having me, and thank you, Juliana, Lauren, and I know Brittany's not on here. Just the friendly nature you all have extended to me from the Prevention Action Alliance, I really appreciate. I think now, as we're all in this social format of online and technology, we get to meet people that we may have never met before. So there are some good things coming out of COVID. We just got to pick them out sometimes. And so I'll jump right in. And again, as Lauren said, we're going to be using the chat box to try to be as interactive as possible. I've sat through so many webinars as a participant or as a presenter, and I'm like, I just want to interact with people a little more. And so, but also if you have questions for myself or Juliana or even Lauren, please put them in the Q&A and we'll answer those as well. So I'll jump in, making sure technology is working on my side. It is. So the intended outcomes for today, I mean, this is the former faculty member in me coming out to reinforce why we're here, is to really talk about some methods of supervising up. We all have supervisors, and sometimes it's like, I wish they would just understand, how do I communicate to them? How do I help them? How do I, in turn, having help them help me to understand concerns and ideas? Some reflection piece, being able to articulate the impact of COVID on you professionally and where that may be impacting your career trajectory. You may need some decisions to make. And then we'll share and learn and identify some strategies that are helping us right now. The other thing I'll say as a disclaimer is I'm not here to provide all the answers. A lot of what I'm going to do is ask a lot of questions that will hopefully spark some reflection in you all and also spark some answering of questions that you may have for yourself. But I also hope we come out with you feeling a little more validated in how you may be feeling in certain ways. And I'll kind of share some of the reflection that led me to where I am as well. So hopefully this will be helpful for all of us. So a little bit about who I am. I always like to know about, who is this person presenting to me? They don't understand me. They don't understand what I've done and do. And so I like to give a little backdrops for you all to know that I had some of the same roles that you have and feeling some of the same things you are. So I'll start with the left. The left-hand picture is my family. And so that's my brother to the right, my nephew in the middle, and my sister-in-law to the far left, and they are the center of everything for me. And so they'll probably be embarrassed that I put this picture up, but it's okay. But I think now more than ever with COVID, we realize some of the things that ground us that we may have taken, not put as much care into before. I lived in South Florida and they were in Charlotte, and now they're in New York and I'm in Baltimore. But more than ever now, I make the effort to visit them more, to talk to them more. Not that I didn't value life as much before, but now it's so fleeting for people that I'm like, I have to invest in this time more. And if there was a weekend where I was like, oh, you know, I could do this or this, now I try to take that weekend to go see my family more. I don't know if they're happy about it, but I am. And so, the middle picture is the Goucher logo where I currently work. Once the pandemic started, I was at a school in South Florida and I had been there for 13 years. I started out as an assistant director of residence life there. And over the 13-year span, I had moved up to associate dean of students. And in South Florida, the school I was at, we had patient zero of college students with COVID in March of last year. And so when the students came back, they were on a spring break trip to Ireland and they came back and I didn't know what I was doing. I knew COVID was out there. I didn't know what exactly we need to put in place. I think all of us were kind of clueless at that moment, but what we do in higher ed, we all jump in and figure out a way and triage and make it work. And so after working with those students, I had to quarantine at home for a while. And that's when a lot of reflection for me started, where I was like, what is the next thing for me? What's important for me? Where do I belong? What type of school is the right fit? And I started this virtual interview process. I picked one school that I felt aligned with what I valued, and I started the interview process. And now I'm at Goucher College, and I have literally worked from home since August of last year at Goucher. So I've met our president, my supervisor twice. I haven't met most of my staff, but it was the right decision for me. I still keep in touch with people at my last institution, but it really provided me not a break because I was still working, but some time to really be home and really ask myself some tough questions that I'll also pose to all of you on today. The far right-hand side is BTS. And so I'm sure some of you are like, how did they end up on the screen? Well, when you're going through things, sometimes you need to lean into what can bring you some happiness. And so I really have always kind of been into K-pop, but just listen to more of this 7-member Korean boy band and what they symbolized. They had a message of love yourself, speak yourself. And it just made me happy to listen to them. Other people may have different things that they have, but even now, whenever I watch a show or hear a show from them or hear their music, it just makes me happy. And so, and it also helped me to connect to other students in that I may have normally not connected into, and being able to have that relationship with students and finding a connection point was important, but it's also just a hobby of mine. And I think celebrating who we are and the things that make us unique, it's fine to share that. Most people may have a preconceived notion of who Korean pop fans are. Well, I'm one of them. So hopefully that breaks a stereotype. And the last thing is a quote that I've always lived by. Ability is what you're capable of doing. Motivation determines what you do. Attitude determines how well you do it. I always say in an interview process, when a candidate comes in front of me, your resume got you to this point. I don't need to know what kind of room condition forms. How do you have an academic advising session? How do you change a filter as an HVAC technician? But really, what is your attitude while doing it? How do I know you're having a rough day? What will I know if you're having a good day? And then how do you choose your attitude every day? For some of us who are a little more seasoned like me, I remember the fish philosophy that was really big in the 2000s, and it was choose your attitude. So hopefully this gives you all a little perspective of who I am, and that I'm not just talking at you, but I've been in some of your shoes. Some of you, I haven't been in your place, but I also recognize the advantages that I have that I'm going to share with you in terms of making some of the decisions that I made. So the first activity to make sure we're all awake and in it is everyone, don't put it in the chat box yet, but in the chat box, if you haven't done the flood the chat box exercise, shout out to SCI, which is the Student Conduct Institute out of New York. I was on a webinar with them for some student conduct training for a couple of weeks. And at the beginning, they had this flood the chat box exercise. And I'm like, what is this? So there's a question on the screen. I'm going to give everyone a couple of minutes to type in your answer in the chat box. And then when I say go, everyone hit enter. And it's going to flood the chat box with all of our responses. And so then you can see what you may have in common or not have in common with some other people on here with the same answers. So the first question, what is something you've surprisingly learned about yourself over the past month? So type it in the chat box, but don't hit return yet. And then I'm going to tell you when to go. You too, Lauren and Juliana, you've had to learn something about yourself. I will type in the answer as well. Okay, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Everyone hit enter. I love watching trash TV. I'm more extroverted than I thought. Resiliency, I like to read. More patience, which is a good one. More flexible. I really would like to be more of a homebody. Agreed. I'm slowing down. I love sleeping. Absolutely. Adaptive technology. You all have learned some incredible things. I put on there too, I realized how much of a night owl I am. I'm so efficient between the hours of like 9 to 2 a.m. I'm like cranking, like the Kermit the Frog meme, just going. And so how are you going to now use what you've learned about yourself in your role? How are you going to continue with some of that if you like what you learned about yourself? And if you don't like what you've learned about yourself, how are you going to change that? So we have another one when you're ready. What is a self-care tactic that you've learned over the past 12 months? I shared mine already. BTS is one of them. I really dig into music. For those who said you like trash TV, I'm the queen of it. So type in, don't hit enter yet. Okay, give you a couple more seconds. All right, on the count of 3, ready? 1, 2, 3, hit enter. Yes, unplugging the phone, walking during lunch, me time, exercise, walk outside, sleeping, Netflix, speaking with my parents more, shut down the computer, absolutely. Hiking, I need to talk to you because I don't hike, I need to. House plants, I tried. I'm gonna try again, I promise. Netflix, working out, bird watching, listen to body if tired, sleep, absolutely. Working with power tools, That's a good one. Bird watching, meditation. Good. Hopefully, some of these things that you've picked up as a self-care tactic, you'll keep as well. I realize some things have time with animals. Some things has forced me to take self-care. Like I realized that I was just putting other things first. And now with this, I realize I have to take better care of myself, to take better care of other people in my life, to do better at work. I remember one of my mentors a few years ago gave me the airplane analogy because I was putting everybody else before me. And she told me, she was like, think of the airplane. On the airplane, they tell you to put your mask on first and then help someone else put theirs on first. Because if you put theirs on first and don't take care of yours, who's going to help you? And now you can't help anyone else. And that really resonated with me because I always thought that was selfish. I'm here to help other people, but if I'm not in a healthy spot to help other people, how can I do that? So, okay, last one. What is one word to describe how you feel today? So don't hit enter yet, just type it in. And the only thing that I will ask is not to use an expletive. I did that before with one of my staff and I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that one. But it doesn't have to be a positive word. If you don't feel positive today, it could be whatever word. So on the count of three, 1, 2, 3, hit enter. I've seen all words that I've felt throughout today. Hopeful, joyous, tired, yes, calm, fatigued, steady, distracted, content. All right. I have said that several times. I used to, when somebody said, how you feeling? I was like, good. Even if I wasn't now, I agree. Some days I'm like, all right. And some days I may drop the L and the R and just say, all right. Like that just may be the best response that I may have. So, let's go to the other slide because I think the first part will answer something right away. Every word everyone just put in, you are right. You are right to feel that way. For some of us, it feels like we've been trudging through mud. For some of us, we've learned more things about ourselves that we never thought we would. And in case anyone hadn't told you, you are right to feel that way today. And it may feel different later today. It may feel different tomorrow, but you're right to feel that way. And don't let anyone take that away from you that you feel that way today. You can choose how you want to shape feeling that way today, but you're right in feeling that way. So I want to jump into reflection in the moment. A lot of times we wait till something has ended to reflect upon that experience or to reflect upon what it meant to us. But I may ask some questions today that no one has asked you. And I'm not trying to convince anybody to leave the field, stay in the field, leave their job or anything. But it's giving you some questions to think about that may be related to why we feel some of those words that we put in the chat box. So is this still what you want to do? As I shared before, I knew I wanted to stay in higher ed. I knew I wanted to stay in student affairs. I knew I still wanted to work in colleges, but during this time frame, I had to figure out, is this still the role I wanted? Is there something more meaningful I wanted to do? And some people are like, why would you want to become a vice president at a school right now? And it really was, I wanted to be at a smaller school, one, but I felt like I was ready to make some of the decisions that were being made for me before in the role. Not saying that the decisions made were not right, but I felt like I was now learned enough to be able to do that. And I think back to, I was at another school in Florida during Hurricane Katrina, Rita, and Wilma. And at the end of Wilma, I was like, you know what? I'm going to admissions. I'm not dealing with people's toilets anymore and their beds and their children overnight. I'm going to admissions, recruit them here, and then pass them off. And I was like, that's not what I want to do. That's what I wanted to do in that moment. So I just didn't have to deal with it anymore. But it's okay to ask, is this still what you want to do? I have several colleagues who are debating what they want to go do right now. And I have some colleagues who feel recommitted to what we're doing right now. But it's okay to ask yourself that question. I'll also admit that I was in a privileged position that I didn't have children or I wasn't taking care of anyone else. I know some people on here may be caretakers or really kind of in a position where you're not able to go somewhere else. But the question isn't about today, is this still what you do? But as you're making these decisions, it's okay to ask yourself that. How do you see your role post-pandemic? is another one. We're not going to be in this forever. And so does it matter what your role will be post-pandemic if you're not in a place where you feel like this is what I need to be doing? And or how does your role shift post-pandemic? And so I shared with Juliana on the webinar that I was on last time that is segueing into the next one. I don't typically work before 10 unless the president asks me to, or if there's a meeting to. As I told you before, I'm a night owl, but I also know that most college students are not coming to my office at 8:30 in the morning to say, "Hi, Dr. Camp, can we talk about BTS?" They're not. They're doing it at 8:30 at night. And so for me, I've always had the philosophy of it's getting the work done. Why do I need to do it between 8:30 and 5 if I'm working with college students? Now, I know some of the roles that we have dictate certain hours. I know there's different cultures at different schools, but for me, it was important. And it's not just being the vice president. Even when I was an area coordinator, that was also part of my interview process that I always ask, what are the time frames that you expect people to work? And is there any flexibility in that? And so now figuring out what are some of your non-negotiables. I've had some staff members ask me now, as we transition back to campus, can I work from home a day out of the week? Can I continue that? And I'm fine with that. Not all of your supervisors may be supportive of that, but I was fine with that because I knew that they would still get work done and still can do that from home. And there was a reason why. And so I asked why. It was because my kids will now have a day home from work. So it also allowed me to build relationships with my team in doing that. And I know some of you on here right now are supervisors. So that may be some questions that you're asking yourself, but asking the people that report to you as well. One negotiable that I didn't even know I needed to have is my current supervisor. The president doesn't really do email on the weekend unless it's something of urgency. And it's because they know right now we're not having a break. Literally, my home office is on the other side of this wall. So I felt during this pandemic, I'm always at work. And so trying to put in some boundaries where even if I'm in the place of work, I don't have to be working. And that's why I appreciate what some of you said in the flood the chat box exercise of turn your phone off, disconnect from the internet if you can, and to have some of those breaks and to let your colleagues know I'm taking this break right now. Have you created some new boundaries personally and professionally? I have typically been a very private person. And now I've realized I need to tell my colleagues and my team more that I need to put my family first a little bit more. And so if there's not a commitment on the weekend, I'm going to try to visit my family and let them know that that's important to me. So that's kind of a boundary I broke for myself. But even setting some new boundaries as well. I had a staff member who told me, Aarika, I understand you're efficient between 10 and 2 a.m. That doesn't mean we are. And I had to say, you know what? I need to give always the disclaimer now. I'm not expecting anybody to respond to my emails during that time. I hope you are asleep. And so it's just to make sure that I give you a timely response. And so that's where now hopefully we're having better conversations about what our expectations are of each other. And what our boundaries are for each other, and communicating that in a way that supports one another's safety and wellness and health. Who's in your professional and personal and support network? Again, I had to do some evaluations, and again, I may say some things that some of you may not like, and that's okay. But I had to tell one person the word friend ends with the word end for a reason. And some friendships didn't survive everything that I've been going through at this point because I felt like I wasn't being a good enough friend to them. They were not being a good enough friend to me. And that's okay. And that I may have needed to bring in some new people. Like I said, I would have never met Juliana if it wasn't from the webinar that we were on before. But now I know that there's a new colleague out there where if I needed to have another avenue to talk to someone about something, or if I'm trying to connect a new staff member that may be moving to Ohio, I now know someone to connect to. So it's reevaluating as well. What kind of colleague have I been to other people? Have I been asking the right questions of really, how are you doing? And not just taking the, oh, I'm okay, but really digging in, offering support. How's your family? How are you dealing with this? Is there something else that I can do to support? Is there a deadline I can work to extend on with you or whatever? And not just the people I work with, but my peers as well. So I understand what title and position I'm in, that I may have some liberties that some of you may not, but even looking from when I was just an entry level hall director, thinking back of if I was still in that role, is there a time where I could pick up a duty night for somebody? Or if I was an academic advisor, is there a time that I can help someone else with a coaching session for a student, one of my colleagues? And then the last one, have you changed as a supervisor, colleague, or an employee? Um, I noticed changes in myself as a supervisor. I think now, and not to be cliche, I give much more grace than I ever did before. And I think that's really important, that if somebody's not meeting a deadline, it's not, unless it's something that really is a crisis situation. And if they are telling me, I'm coming up on this deadline and I may not be able to reach it, but you can get it here or here, to extend some of that, to listen more. I've changed to be a better listener than I've ever had before, listening for the things that aren't being said as well. And asking some more of those questions has become important to me also. So before we go on to the next slide, given everything that I've kind of shared in here, we're not going to necessarily do the same flood the chat box thing, but I'm going to ask somebody, is there anything you want to share in the chat box? If you want to give examples, I'll give a countdown again. If you don't want to, you don't have to put in there. But just yes or no, do you think you've changed as a supervisor, colleague, or employee since the beginning of COVID? So on the count of three, put yes or no. 1, 2, 3. Yes, yes. Heck yeah. Yes. Good. And hopefully with some of those changes, you've seen some things that you've, like we talked about before, learning about yourself, that some of these changes you've seen have made you a better supervisor, colleague, or employee, or made you say, I don't want this role like this anymore, and I want to change that. I have one friend who was like, I just don't want to supervise people anymore. And he was like, that is the hardest part of my job. I do not want to supervise people anymore. Okay, so what are you going to do? And so they found a different role where they're now working in IT at the college, where they're not supervising anyone. They're a technology assistant, and they're loving it. And so it's okay to also recognize that because of the changes we've identified in ourselves in this, that we may want to alter what we're doing and how we're doing it. So I appreciate you all being transparent, and that yes, you've changed in those types of ways. So one thing I wanted to share as well, and this is me really processing and reflecting on myself, and hopefully this gives you all a space to look at that too. I've had several staff members, and there's been days that I've struggled with it too, of I'm kind of anxious to go back onto campus. I know a lot of you may be working at your school right now, or in a physical office. But I've been, like I said, working virtually since I got this role. And I've had several staff members, as schools are going through budget cuts, or schools going through restructuring, or as other staff are leaving, that are like, I'm anxious to return to work. I'm anxious to keep my job. And what we may see as the outside of that person as a colleague or supervisor is, wow, they're being super detail oriented, or more outgoing or active than normal. They're being super helpful, hardworking, just reinforcing their loyalty, when really on the right-hand column is what they may be experiencing. And so I think it's okay to have conversations with people. And I've tried to open doors, at least for my colleagues, even to say, this is how I'm feeling, and this is what I'm trying to compensate for to offset that feeling a little bit, or if this is how it's manifesting itself. I've had some staff members who I'm like, wow, you're doing way too much. Is this to distract yourself, or is it just you worried about something? And I had one staff member's like, I'm just trying to do everything to keep my job. And I realized I needed to reinforce to them that I wasn't in a situation where I was looking at them not being in their role anymore. And so while I appreciate their level of commitment and productivity, I wanted to come from a different place than from their anxiety level. And so I wanted to share this screen with you all in terms of how anxiety could be manifesting itself in each other and in our friends and our peers. And so really looking into that. So hopefully that was helpful for you all to see, but also to start having conversations with yourself or your colleagues about. So supervising up, down, and all around. And so I supervise people. I report to someone. Typically, we all are in that type of situation. But the first question is, do you know who you're reporting to at this moment? And so not just the person in the title, but we've talked about, well, we've mentioned that we've changed as supervisors, employees, and colleagues. What about the people we report to? Most likely they would have answered yes too. And so, do we have the same expectations of them from who they may have been before as we do now, especially if they've changed? And are we communicating who we are now to them as well? And so, I think that's important as we're starting to look at who am I really reporting to now, what stressors they may be on. And that doesn't mean you stepping into offer this new level of support, but it's kind of understanding, okay, this is how this person is functioning now, and I'm functioning different. How do we now function together? And that's where it kind of led into the anticipation, intervention, and navigation. What may be a top priority on your plate that you were working on before, is that now the same for your supervisor as well? And so I've had to constantly try to remind my staff, yes, these things were important before, but now, given where we are, these are the new list of things that are important. And asking your supervisor right now, what's the three most important things that are on your plate that you're tackling and addressing? Because it may be different than what you're working on, and that may be why they may not be as invested in something you're working on that you feel like you're um, grinding the stone to get done. And so, really talking about now, what are some interventions that you can be doing or having your staff do of issues that you see rising where you're like, we can hold off on that. Or even looking at, and I know it's kind of corny to say the SWOT analysis, but now given everything on the plate of my staff, some things we just can't do anymore. I'm not going to burn out people anymore to that extent to try to get something done that's not the biggest return on investment. And so we need to stop doing some of these things. And for some of them, I say, resources don't allow us to do that. Some people assume that was money, and I was talking about human resource capacity. And understanding and revising capacity and expectations. I think talking to our colleagues now, for those of you who are caretakers, whether that is a family member, a pet, a child, a dependent, that if you're a caretaker now, your capacity may have been different for you to pick up things that you would have normally picked up. And so just thinking in my last role, I was one of those that would volunteer readily for anything and everything. I was hungry for the next role, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to volunteer for this. Now I look at it as that time where I could have been volunteering. I still volunteer for things, but some of that extra that somebody else could have picked up or needed to do is the time that I try to go see my family. Thinking back to what some of you put in the chat box, that may now be your Netflix time. That may now be your hiking time, walking time, or for some of us, that just may be the time we need a nap. A good nap is really good. And with a weighted blanket, there's nothing like a good nap sometimes. And so really talking about that capacity, expectations of when things will get done. And so hopefully you all have relationships with your supervisors where you can say, hey, let's talk about what our expectations are. We may have not revisited this since I started in the role, or we haven't done this in a year, but what are our expectations for each other? If you're supervising staff or a group of people, looking at those expectations again of what you're expecting of each other. And then what are your needs? And so not everyone has one-on-ones. If you're one of the people that need it, want it, communicate it. So I currently meet with my direct reports for an hour every week. That may sound like a lot, but part of the hour is transactional and part of the hour is just checking in so I know where they are right now. So if I'm capable of giving them another project, is it not the time to give them another project? But I'll say I've learned the most about myself as a supervisor through this last 15 months. And one of them is that one-on-one dedicated time to that person is really important for both of us. So I'm going to ask the next question in the chat, and it's a two-parter. So answer and then comma the next answer. So I'll give an example in there. Do you have one-on-ones with your supervisor? And if not, do you want them? And if you do you like them? So don't type it in yet. So for instance, I'm gonna type, yes, I have one-on-ones and I love my one-on-ones. So I'm gonna give you a couple of seconds to type that. So do you have one-on-ones? Yes or no? And do you enjoy them? So put it in the box. Everybody hit enter or put in your answer if you want to. Yes, mostly. Yes, love them most of the time. I look forward to my one-on-ones. Good. Yes, I do. I like them mostly. Good. I'm really happy to see that so far everyone is saying, yes, you have one-on-ones usually. I would say the other question to put that out there is, how are they structured? And so my mentor has all of her one-on-ones. They bring in agendas or send her an agenda beforehand to have efficiency of the time. My current president lets me lead the meeting off first with my agenda of items, and then we'll cover items. Some people will start off as the supervisor with their agenda of items. So go back and think if you need to revisit your one-on-ones. For those of you who are saying mostly or usually, really tell your supervisor, if you can, what that means. And if you're the supervisor, telling your staff member what those one-on-ones mean to you as well. Great. And I see one comment, I'm the boss, love the concept, I'll start them this quarter. It is very helpful to stay in the know that way. One thing I always tell any supervisor I've had, my job is to prevent you from being caught off guard. And I ask my staff, please don't let me get caught off guard by anything, because then that allows me to help you, advocate for you in other spaces. So I'm really happy that you all are using that one-on-one time. Also figure out how much time you need. I have an hour with everyone. I have an hour with my supervisor. Some people say they can knock it out in a half hour. I'm a chatty Cathy, so half hour doesn't work for me. But really figure out how to use that time the most effectively and efficiently. So what's next for you? Renegotiating the space that you're in. That doesn't mean barging into the office saying I need more money, even though I think all of us need more money. But I realize too, even if we could get more money in some of our roles, that may not make us fully happier in what we're doing. So renegotiating some of that space that you're in right now for those roles. And so does that mean, hey, this project, now being transparent, and if there is something that you're working on and it's been a tradition that you've done for years and you know it's not well received anymore, you know it doesn't work, it's expired its time, now renegotiating that, because a lot of us have now some of the tradition we've had to stop them and modify them with technology, but now renegotiating that space you're in, whether that's even saying, you know, I would like to work from home one day, or I would like to block out, even if you're physically on campus, a 4-hour block a week just to now walk around campus, pick up a student and we go for a walk, or jump into these other spaces I hadn't done before, visit other offices or colleagues or whatever. So it's now renegotiating how you're working. Are you more efficient online than you've been at in your office? And so what aspects of that do you bring in, or vice versa? One thing that I will say I renegotiated for myself in this new role, I wore suits to work every day in my last role. Why? Because it seemed like it fit the culture. I get here and my president doesn't wear a tie. And he's like, why do I need a tie every day? And I was like, that's a good question. Like, does it change how great you are as a president? No. And so it's those sorts of things where now I think I feel more comfortable, even when I do go on campus a couple of times, or even on Zoom, that I'm more comfortable in my own skin with what I'm wearing than this restrictive suit. I don't know if any of you saw, oh, I can't remember. Reese Witherspoon put out a tweet the other day that she thought she had appendicitis, but she had just finally put on pants with an actual waist band in them and with buttons and zippers. And she was like, I didn't know this feeling again. So really looking at what do you need and as we're moving forward out of this pandemic in your roles that you're in. Do you remain in higher ed? There's a lot of ex-pat higher ed people. And the interesting space that I'm in now is I support them, but I also ask them to support us that are still in higher ed. And that some of us, this is what I've done since I was in undergrad, and my family's in higher education as well. I didn't share, my brother's a head of school at a K through 12, but he used to be in student affairs. My sister-in-law is now independent college counseling business, but she used to be actually my hall director when I was in undergrad, and which was an interesting dynamic. But there's people who make shifts, but at the same time, I support my colleagues who are even recommitted to our field, and that's okay too. So just offering that support, asking yourself, what would you want to do if you left student affairs? But the other part is the things that you would look at outside of higher ed, are they within the scope of a college as well? Looking at different functional areas also. I will say in higher ed, we have the best transferable skills you would ever imagine. Just when we think we're in a box and limited, you can read another position description and see transferable skills that you're like, yeah, I can do that. I have that experience. But sometimes we don't take the time to really evaluate what our transferable skills are. And so taking an assessment of that. Belonging and affinity. I still share with my colleagues here. I love the last school that I left. I love my friends and the colleagues I have there, but now I have the same belonging and affinity here as well. It's just different. And I've only been here 9 months, so it won't be the same as after 13 years. But we talk a lot about this with our students. Belonging, affinity leads to retention. Belonging and affinity leads to retention of staff as well. And so what is it that we need to feel like we belong? What is it that we need to feel like we have affinity for what we do and where we work? And so that's another question to kind of present to yourself of what do I need to have that feeling? And for me, it really was refining who my colleagues were every day that I talked to and who I trusted to go to, and opening myself up more to them. I often said, oh, they don't know me, but I didn't really give them the chance sometimes to get to know the real me. They knew the person in the title and the role. And so really trying to be a little more open where I help them remove the, they don't know me. Well, I need to let them know me a little more. And then the job search landscape. I've shared before, I did all of this virtually. So I got the job here at Goucher. I did all the interviews virtually. I never flew to town to see the school. I got an apartment off YouTube that I saw the outline on YouTube. I found a listing on rent.com, went on YouTube and said, yeah, it looks good. I got 2 rooms. That's all I need. And so right now, the job landscape may be different from what some of us have experienced before, but there are jobs out there. And so I wanted to put that out there, but that's not telling you to leave your job. So what I wanted to present to you all was, it's okay to be happy in the space you're in. It's okay to say, I need to tweak these things in the role. It's okay to say, maybe I need to look at what's next for me. But I would also say most of the people on here are probably identified by others as a mentor, a colleague, a supervisor, a confidant. And so really talking to your friends and peers and colleagues about some of these questions as well is really important, because then, at least for me, I start reflecting when I talk to other people about these things. So even as I was making this presentation, I was like, yeah, what is making me feel so happy here? And I realized it was the people that I was working with. I hate the abundance of email, I'll tell you that. But when I'm able to call up another colleague and say, what's the number in your inbox right now unread? And then when they tell me, I'm like, yeah, we're both behind. And so it doesn't make it better, but at least lets me know that I'm not alone in this. And so I wanted to share that all with you. So next question for the chat box. Don't hit enter yet, but what is one thing that creates a sense of belonging or affinity for you in your current role? So I shared it's the people that I work with. So now you can start entering in the chat box and enter your response. What is one thing that helps you feel a sense of belonging or affinity in your current role where you work? Colleagues, coworkers, communication, coworkers, our team, absolutely. It's a lot of the other people that we work with that I see partnerships, connection to the community we serve, absolutely. Connection to colleagues, trust, that's a really good one. Seeing students succeed, coworkers, staff, they're all new within the past 6 months. That's huge. So now what I would say too is, I also like Valerie's coworkers, is have you told them that? That's something else that I realized I never did enough of, was telling the people that I worked with how much I enjoyed working with them. I assumed that they knew because I asked them to go to lunch. I would stop by their office and just thought, oh, they know I like them, right? And I didn't know how some people felt about me until I was leaving my last role. But I figured out in this new role, I needed to tell my coworkers how much I appreciate them. Oh, that's a good one. Coworkers are miss pranking them. And I'm sure they missed you pranking them. And it's those types of breaks in the day that home right now I miss as well. And so I would say, I would challenge you all, whether you're working virtually or in person on your campuses or in your roles, that within the next week or two, pick one colleague and just say, hope you know how much I like working with you. Like, you are one of the reasons why I really like working here. And hopefully somebody will say that back to you. I'm sure they will. But really extending that to someone. I learned a long time ago, it's the little things like that that you would be so surprised that can make someone else's day, but you're just being genuine and honest and caring and doing that. So I would challenge you all to extend that courtesy and compliment to someone within the next week or so. The last thing before I jump to the Q&A, because I also like being efficient with time and keeping us on time, or Juliana yell at me. But as I shared before, I'm kind of a quote person. And so learn from the past, watch the present, and create the future. And that's really kind of the mode that I'm in right now, just realizing I've learned so much more than I thought I could learn about myself. And it's frustrating that it took a pandemic to really make me dig in more. And I also realize some of you are having responsibilities at home that doesn't allow you to have some of this reflection time. So I appreciate you taking the hour right now to even be in this moment to hopefully start thinking of some of these questions of what is my current present. But also watch what you're in right now. Are you feeling yourself shift? Are you seeing yourself shift? Are you seeing yourself put you first? Are you seeing yourself not put you first than you should? And so really watching the present, but then taking what you've learned, watching what we're in now to shape what's next for you. I've told several people in higher ed, we are not going back to 2019 anytime soon. And I wish we could. I want us to, but we're not. And I still have students. When are we ever going to have a concert again? Hell, I don't know. I've been wanting to see BTS now for a year and a half. I'm still sitting on concert tickets. So I don't know when we'll ever be able to bring a real indoor concert to a college campus again, but I know we will get there. But it's being honest with each other as well. Oh, Harry Styles is another one. Strawberry Sugar High. And so, but really being honest with each other and our students as well, in terms of it's going to take a minute to get back to where we may have been. And it may not even be the same as it was before. Once we really move past this, we may be doing things completely different, and that may be okay as well. And so I think just having that transparency right now is helping a lot of people. I know it helps me realize it's okay where we are right now. I know we're going to move through this, and what that new normal will be. It's something that I look forward to as well, because hopefully we can come out of this better than what we were in 2019. I know for sure I have colleagues who never use technology as much as they use now. And they've learned so much. They're still fumbling a little bit, but when we come out now, hopefully they'll be even more astute of the resources they had to them that they didn't use before. And so those are the things that I'm looking forward to in kind of creating our future. So with that, I will now turn it to Juliana and Lauren to facilitate us having some questions and insights or anything else. And I'll point out, Juliana, I was 4 minutes early.
You know what? I was watching and I'm like, dang, she's good.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so if you guys want to put in the Q&A box some questions, or even in the chat so that everybody can see your questions, or if you have feedback and comments, please share them. This was really great content, Aarika, so I thank you for this. And, you know, reflecting, I think I can only speak for myself, but sometimes reflecting on yourself is not easy. I don't want to say it's really difficult, but it's not something that I always want to take the time to do because I got way more other things to do. But yes, you're right. It is necessary. And, you know, reflecting what you said about where we're at in this pandemic, that we've had to reflect. If we haven't had time to reflect on ourselves, we've certainly had plenty of time to reflect on other people.
Correct.
So why wouldn't we turn that, you know, that looking glass towards ourselves? Because really, we're the only ones we have control over.
Right. And there's no right answer. That's the other thing that my mom taught me a long time ago. No one else should be able to tell me how I feel. And that's why one of the first things I wanted to stress to you all with how are you feeling today is you're right. and I've heard so many people before, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. You have this and this, you shouldn't feel that way. But that is how you feel. And then you have the autonomy, hopefully, to determine if you want to change how you feel about something or tapping into resources that can help you change how you feel if you want to do that at that moment. So so I absolutely agree. And reflection takes a commitment to do it. And it may be done in spurts, it may be done in long marathons. So
I think, oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, would it be helpful if I stop sharing my screen so we can all see the Q&A? Okay, got it. I see a question. Are your colleagues returning in person? Okay, so the question, hopefully everyone can see it, I'll read it out loud. Are your colleagues returning in person in a staggered schedule anytime soon? And so yes, we are returning in a staggered schedule. Part of that is based on vaccines as well. So people can stagger back once they are completely vaccinated, or they can stagger back depending on what their roles are. So for instance, our athletic coaches have started coming back. Our president actually lives on campus, so he's been in the office the whole time. With my student affairs staff that reports directly under me, it all depends on if their positions are more student facing. We only have about 200 students living on campus now. And so if it's a more student facing role like housing, they are back. If it's student activities, they will come back for outdoor activities, but they're still doing mostly things virtually online. What is it looking like for others? I'm at a community college, so just curious, we are not in person yet. And every school is doing this differently. I would say for us also, our Office of Communications, we've realized even more so what offices really truly need to be on campus. And so our Division of Communications, they're working remotely into the fall. They've already made that decision. They're not student facing. A lot of their work is done using means of technology and phones and email anyway. So there wasn't a rush to return them back. So we're looking in the phases of what's student facing. Student health has been back. And so I think every college is doing it differently, just as every college is making decisions on the vaccine right now. And so I would say, if depending on your roles, talk to your supervisors or talk to leadership about who has to come back, who has the opportunity to come back if they wanted to. Some people are just asking me to get out of their house. They were like, I know I'm not student facing, I just need to get out of my house. Then you're welcome to come back safely following these protocols. So hopefully that answered your question, Eric.
Aarika, I'm wondering through this, one of the things that OCI promotes, but then actually it's just kind of organically happened, I think, in a lot of cases for colleges and universities, no matter the size of the campus, is the relationships that they are developing cross-departmentally. And so I'm wondering if you have seen the same similar things. Like normally in a college system, from what I understand, is some departments don't even really touch their boundaries. But since this pandemic, some of them have touched so much, they are now working together on certain initiatives, whether that's towards student wellness or, you know, something else that they've had been responsive to because of the pandemic. So I'm wondering what kind of things like that have you seen?
Well, one, depending on the school, it's not necessarily universal, but people have always talked about the divide of student affairs and academic affairs, of student affairs and faculty. And with going virtually online, students typically on a college campus would pop into student affairs offices. I'm stopping into or academic affairs and my academic advisor, I'm stopping into my hall director. And because they were not physically on campus, it wasn't mandated necessarily that they talk to student affairs people, but because they were in class, they were mandated to see their faculty members every day. And so I had several faculty members who were saying, you know, these students are asking me questions that I've never been asked before. They're bringing up issues to me I never had to address before. And I'm like, because student affairs people or academic affairs people typically handled those questions or concerns. And now they don't regularly see us because we're not in the requirements of their day, or we don't get to bump into them the same way. I'm not just gonna Zoom bomb something so I can say hi students like I would on campus and bump into a campus event and just say hi everyone. And so I think some faculty members have a newfound respect for their colleagues who were in the student services, whether that's academic affairs or not. The other thing that I learned a lot about was I always was keen into athletics to begin with. And I knew how important the sport or the competition was to our students, but the amount of value of the college experience some of our students put into that, it was more surprising. In terms of some students were like, I have to play my sport. Like that's what keeps me mentally sane. That's what keeps me physically healthy. That's how I make friends. That's my outlet. I was an introvert until I got on this sport, especially if it's an independent sport. So we have equestrian here. And some of our students not being connected to the horse that they've been with for years, seeing that impact on them. So making that connection. I think the other part that I tapped into more was my colleague in campus operations. There is, and most campuses, not all, there is a distinct difference of our colleagues who work in physical management or facilities management and what this experience has been like for them. Sometimes we think that they may just come in and do a task and go home, but our students mean a lot to them as well. And the impact that a lot of student affairs or faculty may say, I miss our students. All of our colleagues miss our students just because they were the person that was going into a residence hall room or was the person working on the classroom or the IT person working with internet. I never really understood the extent of relationships that those staff members had with students as well, and how much they missed the student interaction and the students missed talking to them too. And so those are some of the connections that I saw. And so hopefully some of my colleagues who are on here, as you all are in different schools, are starting to see the relationships that you may not have seen before because of where we may have been in our own silos.
That's an interesting observation. When I as you were talking, I had two thoughts. One, I have a son in college, and one of the things now that I'm thinking about it that he really enjoyed was going to the cafeteria, and he loved the people that worked in the cafeteria. Like he's like, I miss just going in there and seeing and interacting and stuff, like not just his friends that he would eat with, but the people that were working there. Yeah. And then the second one is, as you were talking, so I have a rich background in prevention in elementary through 12. And one of the things that we always promoted when we would talk to staff of any kind, so we would talk to bus drivers and, support staff and, the lunch ladies and all that, is the importance of having a connection even with one kid. If there's one kid that is, reaching out to you and you make a connection, just go with it. You could be that one adult connection outside of their home that makes the difference or whatever. And so to think of that transferring into a college campus experience for a student is like, wow, okay, yeah, I could see that. But I don't think it's as prevalently thought about, like you said, until now, until it's not there, until it's not accessible.
Mm-hmm. I've always admired that I had colleagues who worked in dining operations who could say to me, hey, did you know that Cecil hasn't been in the cafeteria in the last 3 days? And Cecil always eats 4 meals a day as a basketball player, and he hasn't been in here. Had somebody checked on him? And so it's that value of who all has eyes on campus on our students. It's the same with staff. I can tell if, like, I haven't seen Juliana from IT in a minute, like what's going on? So it's those pieces that I realized that I needed to put more value on when I return back to campus. So I see a question in chat box too. How do you combat the feeling of I haven't accomplished anything when in reality you've accomplished quite a bit, but it just isn't what it's typically look like? How do you stay motivated in that feeling? I will say this to most people. I get along better with 18 and 19-year-olds than I think I get along with other 41-year-olds. The random things I watch on TV, the music that I listen to. And so I feel, and there's days here where I feel like, am I being a good vice president because students don't know me that well yet? But how will they know me in my guest bedroom in my apartment? I mean, if there's not a structured meeting for me to be in with certain students, I don't have the same reliance on popping into events or the same reliance of going and cheering on in a basketball game. So this is where I've given myself some grace and figured out how will I measure success in this setting versus how will I measure success when I'm on campus. And part of that is, does my staff know me well? Have I started building relationships with them? Did I get through my email today? Like, I try to set a number goal for my email, and being realistic, I'm not going to get through all of them today. And so how many do I want to get through? How many can I try to get through? So really, I would say, start asking yourself, how are you defining success in your current situation? Because typically I defined it by how many students know me. Did I save a student's life today? Did I do this and this and this? Did I have an event? How many people attended the event? But we can't use those same measures anymore. I think we're doing a disjustice if we are now trying to track how many students came virtually to an event, as opposed to before when we were on campus came to an event, because they're sick of Zoom by the end of the day. No matter how great your Zoom event may be that evening, if they've been on Zoom all day, think about it. We are done with Zoom. Where it's different before, we could just go knock on a student's door, or as for a community college or a school with more commuters, we could catch them on the way to the garage, or we can have an event in the garage or parking lot. Now, a lot of our students are home and we don't have that same access to convince them this is worth coming. So really now defining new measures of how you're going to define success and talking about that in a one-on-one with your supervisor. And again, those expectations, because if you're still thinking you're measured the same in this virtual platform as you were when we were in person, you're doing yourself a disservice. So using your time with your supervisor and with yourself to say, this is how I'm going to measure this now and what I'm going to hold myself accountable to. So anonymous attendee, I hope I answered your question and gave you some insights on that. Any other questions or insights?
I think that's a really good jumping off point moving forward is how are you going to define your successes now? Because I know that I have been stuck on defining my successes as we once were.
Correct.
And this environment is so entirely turned upside down. So I think that I can reflect that in myself, thinking about that. But then I'm also thinking, how can I get other people to think about the same thing? And then maybe it's just, a matter of having that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, even using this as an example, I don't know what your goal was for a number of attendees versus when you may have done this in person, but giving yourself the flexibility that people are working virtually, people are still right now probably online, but still having their email pop up and so and thank you. I know one person is having to leave right now, but even the amount of time they spent so far on this webinar has been important. So that's where we have to kind of change our perspectives of what you were saying of what defines a successful event right now to people, and how do we measure that? So absolutely.
That's a good point. And when I think about this webinar series, or even the fact that Rise and Thrive has been developed, I don't know that it would have been developed prior. I don't know that we would have had this particular educational opportunity prior to the pandemic. And if we did, I'm now I'm going back and I'm thinking in my head, like, well, when would we have done it, and who would have come, and how would we, because there's so many other factors. If we're doing in person, we are trying to gather people together in a building, and they're coming from all over the place. And so, I guess this is really good alternative.
Well, even in events, when we hold online events right now, you're very welcome, Dolores. I always look at, are the people engaged? So that's why I like having the chat box open, so people can interact as much as they can in this type of space. Are people asking questions? So I've gotten now out of the mindset in measuring success of how many people are there. Because you can have 200 people on here, but if only 2 people are really giving a care about what I'm saying, is that successful? Or if for measuring success, hopefully for you, as you get the eval back, it could be, okay, these people like the eval, but did they take something, like the webinar, but did they take something away? So now I just think we need to define success in a different way and measure our success and efficiency and effectiveness in a different way than what we've done before. And hopefully some of that will even carry over when we come back out on the other side of this, of being in person and everything, of what does that mean?
So that being said, in your opinion, do you think that those things, those tools that we use that measure success or gather information, do you think some of those tools are needing to be adjusted?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So many places will solely go quantitative versus qualitative in looking at measuring success. So even right now, it's so important that we're looking at graduation rates and registration credit hours at schools, how many students are applying to the schools, but we also have to look at who's applying to the schools, how long, what is their experience while they're there. It's one thing to say a student stayed at the school for all 4 years and they graduated from the school within 4 years, but did they have a enriching experience? Did they have an experience where they'll suggest it to someone else? For someone who came in this webinar, did they have a learning experience that will encourage them to tell another friend or colleague about the next webinar? So I think too, we have to move more than ever than just looking quantitatively, but looking at both quantitative and qualitative about the things that we're doing. And I just saw a comment in the chat box, being kind to ourselves is a lifelong journey. Absolutely. But that also extends to what does that kindness morph into over time? And so it's giving ourselves a break, pushing ourselves in other ways, challenging ourselves to learn new things. I've been trying to learn Korean. I'm terrible at it. And I just keep trying and keep trying. And I get one word down and then I try to practice it with somebody and they're like, you said it wrong. And there's been so many times where I'm like, you know what, just forget it. And then I'm like, no, I need to keep trying to do this. Or it's the same here. I keep trying to have events for students to get to know me, and one student may show up. And I'm like, it's okay, because now I at least know that one student and I tried. So definitely being kind to ourselves, extending grace to ourselves, extending grace to other people. And then, yeah, there are going to be times where we have to be a little hard on ourselves, but is it necessary right now? That's the other question I constantly ask. Is it necessary right now to do that? So
There's a comment in the chat. You got it.
I got 4 different things going on the screen. But I'm on. So I'm gonna ask, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say too, I like to give people just a minute to step outside of their norm every day too, of being in this Zoom box and everything that we do. So I'm going to ask a random question that I usually ask my colleagues when I'm on the screen with Zoom right now. If you're able to, or if you're comfortable to, and then I just saw something in Q&A, what do you have on your feet right now? So if you're able to put on shoes, or if you don't have shoes to put on, whatever. But for instance, I'm sitting here in slides right now. Somebody said nothing. UGG boots. Oh, somebody has real. That's impressive. Because I realized that all of us are doing these things differently. Tennis shoes, nothing. Slippers, tennis shoes, slippers. That I think that's one funny thing about returning to work, barefoot, wrapped in a blanket on my couch. Sarah, I'm envious. It's interesting when I'm asking people that, because then I was like, are you comfortable for this meeting right now? And they're like, is it going to be a bad meeting? No, I just want to know if you're comfy. So it's those things too that I think we also have to start taking advantage of, not just jumping into a Zoom meeting and getting right to work, because we're so used to the bumping into each other at work, or the passing by, or if you got into a meeting earlier to go, hey, did you watch that last night? And sometimes we feel like in Zoom, we just gotta jump right into the meeting, but it's still having that moment of, hey, how you been? And then going into the meeting. And so just having that moment to connect. So I thank everybody for putting in your answer. It may seem wonky, but it's one of those things where, again, we're all in this together right now, slippers and all. What do you think are some of the new characteristics of student engagement since the pandemic? I've shared this before as well. I realized that I had a population of students that I did not know enough about and tap into enough about, and those were the students whose lives were online. So I had several students who played D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, or World of Warcraft, or that were really into esports, but not on the esports club. Like they were playing League of Legends on their own in their rooms. And I didn't know how to tap into them well enough, because I was still this traditional person of, they need to come out to something. They need to physically see their academic advisor. They need to come out to our intramural basketball game. They need to come out and meet people. But what I realized during this pandemic is they have their own community of friends online. They may not have, and I think now I realize I was insulting saying you don't know them because they're online. they were spending hours online in World of Warcraft, League of Legends, whatever, with some of these people playing this game, and that was their community. And so now I realized that those students transition during the pandemic has not been as challenging as some of our students who were always out and about, because they were already in this world that now we're adapting to. So I think those are some of the characteristics now that some of our students are celebrating more, being that I was online and in this virtual world anyway. You're just now understanding what I'm doing. I think accessibility is now different in student engagement, and that not everything needs to be held the same traditional way. So looking at, while we're moving back to traditional in-person classes, are there events that still need to happen high flex or blend wise? So if we have a student who is out of town, but they still wanted to play charades night, why can't we still have it in person and stream it online where that student can still participate from where they are? Or can we record things more than what we've ever done before? I never recorded in-person events on campus unless it was like a concert or something like that. But for the student who was working, especially thinking of our students that may be at community colleges, that was working and not able to attend, can they watch it later? Can they listen to something later, a speaker later, and make it readily accessible where they can hear that keynote speaker differently or whatever on their own accord? So now I'm looking at student engagement in a different way of be moving beyond the traditional, let's meet in the courtyard, have this type of event, let's pizza night, ice cream social night. But are there also things that students can take back to their rooms and do that some other students may be doing together in person that they may do later? So a lot of schools are now doing the paints and mock cocktails. So there's different names everywhere, painting with a twist, all of these different things. But why can't we put a canvas and some paints and some brushes together for 2 roommates to do in their room while there's another big room of 100 going on to do it together? Of course, we want them to meet other students, but we can be interactive still and still do that in a different way now that we're leaning into technology more. So those are some of the new characteristics, at least I've taken away from student engagement, that I will be thinking about more as we're readjusting back to on campus. Sarah,
Good point.
the question.
Great. Thank you again, Aarika, for participating in your presentation. I think it was very engaging and it's got my wheels turning. Thanks.
It looks like in the chat, someone's requesting contact info for Aarika before they go.
Whether you want to ask me some follow-up questions on this, you want to talk about BTS, I'm always able to talk about that. Or things in the field. I love connecting with people. I love meeting new people. So you would never guess how introverted I am, but I really am. But I think I'm so indebted to the field of higher ed for what it did for me and allowing me to develop it, that I definitely owe it back to people. So if there's anything that I can do to support any of you, please let me know. My pleasure.
Well, I'm really glad I attended that webinar way back, I don't know, months ago. And
I don't know what day it was.
I don't either. They all blend together anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm really glad that we were able to connect, and I look forward to continuous work with you.
Likewise. And thank you for everybody for hanging in there throughout the webinar. I know, again, these little boxes can be redundant during the day. So I really appreciate you spending the time on here, engaging and flooding the chat box. It really is a fun exercise to go back and kind of scroll through, but also to see all these answers come in at one time. So I borrowed it from, as I said, from the Student Conduct Institute. Please borrowed and credit for them. And I don't know where they got it from, but I think it does break the ice, and no matter what meeting you're in, to kind of have people just flood the chat box with the same answer. So if you take nothing else away, that's a little icebreaker tool to use if you're in a Zoom meeting. So hopefully some of you employ that technique. So, okay, and I think we're close to time now.
Yeah, we are. So thank you. And whoever's left, thank you for attending. really appreciate your participation as well. And we look forward to seeing lots more people, or lots more, not numbers, right? We're not focused on numbers, but at the next webinar in May. Thank you.